Hi, fourth graders. Welcome back to reading class. Happy Tuesday. This week and the following weeks, we are going to be working on different types of nonfiction text structures. So as you are reading a nonfiction text, the author gives it a different text structure for the purpose of the reader. So this week we are going to talk about compare and contrast and what that means, what that looks like, and how that helps the reader understand what they are reading. So before we do that, we are going to watch a quick video.
We've got a nonfiction throwdown tonight as the authors of two articles on the very same topic face eviction from the Story House. Join us on reality TV's only show filled with your favorite writers and characters. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of The Story House. I'm your host, Sophia Romero. We've seen a lot of fictional characters and writers on The Story House, but tonight we're all about nonfiction. Two authors are facing possible eviction from the house. Both authors want to help you get better grades on your tests. Lynn Reddy wrote the article Ace That Exam, a guide to improving your performance on tests. She's up against Tipper Timerson, author of terrific test-taking tips.
Evicted? Me? Whatever could I have done? Look, before you vote, be sure to eat a well-balanced meal. Proper preparation prevents poor performance.
There's just one tip I need to give people who are calling in to vote. The answer is vote her off, not me. That's it. Plain and simple. Easiest test there is.
Okay, let's bring in the professor to break down this matchup in a segment we call Compare and Contrast. Professor, how should voters choose between two writers whose work is about the very same topic?
That's a great question, Sophia. We're really going to look closely to compare and contrast these two articles. We know what's the same about these two articles, the topic of test taking. They both share the same goal of improving your test scores. But when we ask what's different about them, we see some really big differences. Each article makes a very different point. Reddy helps students prepare for an exam. She gives health tips and, overall, focuses on the student. Timerson takes a different approach. She provides question-answer strategies and, overall, focuses on the test.
Wow! So even though they're about the same topic, each makes a very different point.
That's right, Sophia.
Well, there you have it, folks. Two articles on the same topic, but with a very different approach. And as always on the Story House, you decide who gets to stay and who is heading home. Voting lines open up just after this.
Okay. So, like our video said, when we compare When we compare and we contrast, when we compare, we are going to think about how are two things alike and some clue words that might give you a hint that this is a compare and contrast article might be like, same, both, or as well as. So as you're reading, if you see those words, you know that the author is comparing two things. They're talking about how things are alike. Now, when we contrast, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to talk about how are they different, and some clue words that might give you a hint that the author is talking about how two things are different is but, however, different, and instead. So when you are reading something and you might think that the author is comparing these two things, you're going to ask yourself some questions. What are the similarities between these things? So what are some things that they have in common? How are they alike? What similarities do you think are most important? Our author might give us a lot of different examples of how two things are alike, but what do you think are the most important? And are there any details that both things have in common? Now, when you contrast, you're going to ask yourself, what are the difference between these two things? So how are they different? Which differences do you think are most important? And are there any details that one thing has but not the other? So, some compare and contrast question stems may sound like, how are blank and blank alike? So how are the two things alike? How is blank different from blank? So how are two things different? And which word describes both blank and blank? And we're going to talk about some examples of those. So, our example is we are going to look at Michael Jordan, who is a famous basketball player. We're going to look at Tom Brady, who is a famous football player, and we are going to compare and contrast them. So, let's talk about Michael Jordan first. We know, according to this picture, even if you know nothing about Michael Jordan, you know that he plays basketball because you see him with a basketball and you see the net. You know that he is wearing shorts and a basketball jersey, and you know that if you're playing basketball, you have to wear shoes that help you play basketball. So he wears basketball shoes. Those are three things that we know about him. And to compare him, or to contrast him, from Tom Brady plays football. Even if you don't know anything about Mr. Tom Brady, you see him in a football uniform. You see that football in his hand. You know that he is wearing a helmet and wearing pads, wearing the shoulder pads. That's why he looks so bulky. And you know that he is wearing football cleats. So even if you have never heard of Tom Brady, just looking at our picture, you can see that. So to contrast them, we know that one plays basketball, one plays football. We know that one wears shorts and a basketball jersey, one wears pads and helmets, and we know that one wears basketball shoes and one wears football cleats. Now, what do they both have in common? How can we compare them? We know that both of them play sports. We know that one plays basketball, one plays football, but both are sports. We know that they both have numbers on their jerseys. And in these pictures, you can't really see their numbers very clearly, but we know there are numbers underneath there. And we know that they both can throw a ball. One is throwing to another player on the team, and one is trying to throw it into the net. But we know that they both are throwing a ball. And when we're looking at these pictures and we're comparing and contrasting these two people, we could ask ourselves, so how are Michael Jordan and Tom Brady alike? And that is what we did down here in the both category. We can talk about how are Michael Jordan and Tom Brady different, and that is what we did over here in our contrast categories. And we can say what word describes both Michael Jordan and Tom Brady, and that's not something that we talked about, but if we were going to give both of them a word, we know that they are both athletes. So this is one way that we could write down our comparisons and our contrasts of our two athletes. But this is another another diagram that you could use to compare and contrast two people or two articles, two passages, whatever you needed to compare and contrast. And this is going to look super familiar to something that you are doing this week in your Google Classroom. So we have just put our different pieces of information on the right sides. So in this circle, we're going to just talk about Michael Jordan, what he does. In this circle, we are only talking about Tom Brady and what he does. And where our circles overlap, we are talking about what both of those people have in common. So on the outside would be where you are contrasting your two athletes or your passages. And on the middle is where you are comparing them. How are they alike? So you might ask yourself, how do we compare and contrast? The first thing we are going to do is to determine the topic of a passage. And remember, back at the beginning of the school year, we talked about when you are determining the topic of the passage, you can look at the title, you can look at the subtitles, you can look at the pictures to tell you what is the topic of our passage. You are going to think about the author's purpose. Why did they write that passage? What do they want you to know when you are done reading it? You're going to look for ideas that are the same. You're also going to look for ideas that are different. And you are going to make a chart to sort your ideas. Now, we've already talked about this Venn diagram, but this is another kind of chart that you can use to sort your ideas. So if we were going to use this T-chart to talk about Tom Brady and Michael Jordan, we would put Michael Jordan here and Tom Brady here, and we would write all the ways that they are different. So, in your Google Classroom today, you are looking for something called Tuesday Compare and Contrast. And it says to watch the instructional video, open the Google Slides, and read the passage about Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and fill in the graphic organizer with similarities and differences between the two. So, you are going to compare and contrast Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. So when you open up your assignment, it looks like this. You have a short passage with one paragraph being about Benjamin Franklin and one paragraph being about Thomas Jefferson. And after you read that, you are going to go to slide 2 and fill in your graphic organizer. What details, what facts, what important information did the author give us about Benjamin Franklin? What important information did they give us about Thomas Jefferson? And what details were similar? How are those two people alike? Now, if while you are reading it, you have some trouble reading it or you come to some words that you are unfamiliar with, slide 3 is a video linked with Miss Cameron reading it, because there may be a few words in our passage that you are unfamiliar with or you don't know how to read. So I have given you the option of listening to the passage as well. When you are finished, make sure you come back here and click mark as done or submit so that your teacher knows you are finished. And just a reminder that I will have study hall hours from 2:30 to 3 o'clock if you need to work on any missing assignments or you have any questions about anything in reading this week or even from last week. Good job, fourth graders. I will see you on Thursday.